You are always hiding in those offices. You are just a paper pusher for the military." My sister-in-law sneered, tossing a look of utter contempt my way, right in front of her VIP guest. "What is your call sign over there?" The paperclip. The dining room froze. My own brother stared at his plate, deaf and dumb, letting his wife wipe her feet on his little sister in the very house my money was paying for. I did not get mad. I just quietly set my water glass down, looked her dead in the eye, and said, "Reaper 2. Crash. The former Delta Force operator dropped his beer can. The hands that used to pull the triggers of sniper rifles were shaking. He turned to my sister-in-law, his voice dropping into a lethal growl. "Apologize to her. Right now. You have no idea who you are messing with." She thought she could use me as a doormat to elevate herself. But she did not know this cleanup operation was going to be so ruthless, she would not have a single way out. Let me know where you are listening from in the comments. Hit subscribe if you have ever been bled dry by your own flesh and blood only for them to turn around and chew up your pride. Brooks's roar hit the drywall like a physical blow. Diana's jaw snapped shut, then hung open. The thick layer of foundation caked on her face could not hide the sudden, ugly twitch in her left cheek. She shrank back into her expensive dining chair, her manicured nails digging into the upholstery. The aluminum beer can clattered across the solid oak table, leaving a thick trail of white foam soaking into the polished wood. The smell of cheap stale hops suddenly cut right through the overpowering stench of Diana's designer vanilla perfume. I did not flinch. I did not move a single muscle. My back remained locked straight against the high-backed chair, a textbook military posture drilled into my spine over 15 brutal years. Both of my hands rested parallel on my bare thighs. No desperate explanations. Not a single trace of emotion on my face. I just sat in the dead silence and watched her drown. Diana scrambled for a lifeline, her panicked eyes darting around the room as she tried to force a placating, crooked smile. But the muscles in her face betrayed her, spasming violently. She had just kicked a fire ant hill, and that fire was currently standing over her in the shape of a battle-hardened Special Forces veteran. I shifted my eyes to the left. Mark, my flesh and blood, the 42-year-old man who shared my last name. How did he react when a guest screamed in his wife's face to protect his little sister? He looked down. He reached out with trembling, clammy fingers to pick up a silver salad fork that had clattered to the hardwood floor. Then he grabbed a linen napkin and kept his head ducked, scrubbing frantically at an invisible stain on the table. He scrubbed until his knuckles turned white, praying the floorboards would just open up and swallow him whole. He refused to look at me. A pathetic, suffocating silence filled the space between us. The sharpest knife in this room did not come from Diana's sneering insults. It came from Mark's bowed head. He would rather sit there, neutered and silent, letting me be publicly humiliated, than face the wrath of his narcissistic wife. That cowardice tasted like cold ash in the back of my throat. My eyes performed a cold, tactical radar sweep of the dining room. The $3,000 crystal chandelier hanging above us, catching the evening light. The $6,000 solid oak dining set we were sitting at. This entire 4-bedroom, overinflated McMansion sitting in a ridiculously overpriced Fairfax suburb. Every single piece of paper on this property had Mark's name on it. But the mortgage payment bleeding out to the bank on the first of every month, that came straight from my military paychecks. I traded my 20s for this plaster and paint. I ate dry, chalky MREs in the middle of blinding Kandahar sandstorms, sweat pooling under 15 pounds of Kevlar. I slept in a folding cot with my boots on, staring at a corrugated tin roof, waiting for the incoming mortar alarms to shred the night sky. I faced the absolute worst of human warfare, hoarding my hazard pay just to fund this fake plastic royalty for them. And right now, sitting in the center of the kingdom I bought and paid for with my own blood, I was being treated like a parasite, a leech, a useless paperclip. The rim of my water glass pressed against my palm. It was freezing cold. Diana finally stammered, choking on her own spit as she tried to string a sentence together. Brooks, wait, I was just joking. I tuned her out. My left hand slid off my thigh and reached under the edge of the table, my fingers brushing the cold glass screen of my phone. With the pure muscle memory of an intelligence officer who operates blind in pitch-black tactical centers, I unlocked it. I swiped right. Opened the banking app, navigated to joint accounts, auto transfers. My thumb hovered right over the red text that read, "Cancel recurring payment." One tap. Just one tap and the oxygen supply to this Fairfax fantasy would be cut off permanently. I pressed down slightly, but my finger froze, just for a single, agonizing second. My eyes had dropped to Mark's hand, the one still clutching that linen napkin, desperately scrubbing the wood. The index finger on his right hand was missing the top joint. It was an old, ugly, jagged scar. An accident from when I was 12 years old, when he threw his bare hand in front of a shattering window pane to stop the heavy glass from slicing my face open. That missing piece of bone was the exact reason I had tolerated this toxic household for so long. The reason I let Diana drain my accounts dry year after year. But looking at him right now, a broken hollow shell of the older brother who once bled for me, I felt nothing but a cold, hard clarity. That blood debt was paid in full. Today the ledger was wiped clean. Looking at that missing piece of bone on Mark's right hand pulled me straight back to Chicago, 20 years ago. December. The wind whipping right off Lake Michigan, cutting through thin wool coats like a rusted razor blade. 2 closed pine caskets sitting at the front of a freezing funeral parlor. The heavy suffocating stench of cheap lilies trying and failing to mask the sharp chemical bite of embalming fluid. A tired trucker fell asleep at the wheel. His 18-wheeler crossed the center median. Just like that, Mom and Dad were gone. They did not leave us a safety net. They left us a kitchen drawer stuffed with maxed-out credit cards, collection letters, and final notice bills. I was 18. Just a dumb kid packing cardboard boxes for a state college, completely blind to how the real world operated. Mark was 22. He stood next to me in a cheap, ill-fitting suit that smelled like mothballs. He reached out and gripped my hand. I felt that missing knuckle press hard into my palm. He lost that joint when I was 12. I tripped near a heavy glass patio door, and he threw his bare hand right through the shattering pane to keep the falling glass from slicing my throat open. "I will pick up the night shifts," he told me, his voice gravelly, staring straight ahead at the pine boxes. "You are going to college." That was the blood pact. He dropped out of his engineering program the very next morning. He picked up a heavy iron pipe wrench. He spent the next 4 years destroying his knees, crawling under rusted sinks, and unclogging frozen grease traps in the dead of the Chicago winter, so I would not end up sleeping in a homeless shelter. He always came home smelling like copper pipes, PVC glue, and sheer exhaustion. Then Diana moved in. She came with fake designer handbags, a massive ego, and a talent for spending money she did not earn. Right around the time I graduated, Mark took a massive risk. He tried to start his own plumbing supply business. It tanked. The market chewed him up and spit him out. I remember walking into their kitchen and seeing it sitting on the scratched Formica counter. A foreclosure notice, thick, rough bank paper, angry red ink across the top. 30 days to vacate the house our parents left us. I stood in the dark hallway, out of sight, listening to the floorboards creak on the upstairs landing. Diana was pacing, and she was hissing poison directly into my brother's ear. "She owes you her life, Mark." Diana's voice drifted down the stairs, dripping with pure venom. "She leached off your paycheck for 4 years while you ruined your back. You sacrificed everything for her. It is time for her to pay up. Tell her to fix this." I waited in the shadows. I waited for Mark to defend me, to tell his wife that family does not keep a cold cash ledger on survival. He said nothing. I just heard him let out a heavy rattling sigh. The endless grind of blue-collar poverty had finally broken his spine. He let her plant the parasite in his head, and he chose the path of least resistance. I did not cry. Crying does not clear a past-due mortgage. The very next morning, I walked into a strip mall Air Force recruiting office. It smelled like cheap floor wax, stale coffee, and desperation. I sat down across from a bored sergeant, picked up a pen, and signed my 20s away on a dotted line. A 6-year active duty contract. The bait on the hook was a $20,000 signing bonus. I did not keep a single dime of it. Before I even shipped out for basic training, I wired the entire 20 grand straight into Diana's account. It killed the foreclosure dead in its tracks. I buzzed my hair off, shoved my civilian clothes into a donation bin, and let the military machine swallow me whole. I traded my freedom for yelling drill instructors, bleeding blisters on endless rucksacks, and the complete erasure of my identity. I thought it was a clean transaction. He saved my future once. I saved his house. We were square. But I was stupid. You can never settle a debt with a narcissist. To Diana, my 20 grand was not a rescue. It was just a taste of blood. The years dragged on. I survived the meat grinder. I earned my officer bars, captain, then major. Hazard pay rolled in from taking rocket fire in the desert. Combat pay was deposited just for living in the dirt. I left a joint account open with Mark as a safety net just in case his bad knees finally gave out and he needed surgery. Diana found the account, and she weaponized it perfectly. She morphed a temporary lifeline into a permanent mandatory ATM. She systematically brainwashed my brother into believing my money was their rightful property. The government houses her, Mark. I heard her justify over a staticky phone call once. She eats for free in the base mess hall. What does she even need this cash for? We are just holding it for her. And Mark swallowed the lie. It was easier to believe I was living some pampered, all-expenses-paid government vacation than to face the cold fact that his wife was stealing from a deployed soldier. If you have ever had a family member bring up a favor from the past just to bleed your bank account dry in the present, do me a favor. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and type, "I paid my dues," in the comments below. We both know that with these people, no debt is ever truly settled. They drained my accounts with terrifying calmness. Buying Prada sunglasses, leasing luxury SUVs, and upgrading their kitchen appliances, completely ignoring where the money actually came from. Diana was probably sitting on her imported leather couch in the air conditioning, sipping iced tea, clicking checkout on another online shopping cart without a second thought. Meanwhile, I was sitting on a rusted ammo crate inside a 110-degree canvas tent in Kandahar, sweating through my uniform, grit and sand grinding in my teeth. I was staring at a blank, sterile legal document illuminated by a harsh, tactical flashlight. The Air Force requires every soldier to fill it out before stepping foot on a combat deployment. I picked up my black pen and started drafting my last will. I carefully wrote Mark's name on the death benefit line. I sat there in the sweltering heat, listening to the distant crack of gunfire, knowing damn well that if a mortar shell turned me into pink mist by midnight, Diana would be cashing my life insurance check before my body even made it inside the zinc coffin. Kandahar, 2018. 115 degrees in the shade. Inside the Tactical Operations Center, the air conditioning units rattled, fighting a losing battle against the crushing Afghan heat. The room smelled like burning ozone, stale coffee, and the sour sweat of unwashed bodies. The only light came from the pale blue glow of the UAV surveillance monitors, casting long, harsh shadows across our faces. The radio console hissed. Static cracked, followed by the frantic, breathless voice of a radio man. A Navy SEAL element was pinned down. Heavy enemy crossfire in a mud-walled compound. They were taking casualties. Then the signal cut out. Dead air. I sat there in the dim light. I wore captain's bars on my collar back then, and they felt like they weighed 50 pounds. My combat shirt was soaked through, clinging to my spine. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard. I locked my eyes onto the digital map, running the math. Elevation, wind speed, danger, close radius. The lives of an entire elite strike team rested directly under my fingertips. The pressure pressed down on my chest like a physical cinder block. I had to get it exactly right. One wrong keystroke. One slight miscalculation of the blast radius. 15 flag-draped coffins would be loaded onto the back of a C-17 cargo plane bound for Dover Air Force Base. I blocked out the shouting in the room. I blocked out the burning in my eyes. I locked in the firing coordinates and sent the command. The strike hit the target. The compound was leveled. The SEALs walked out alive. Hours later, the adrenaline finally crashed. I dragged myself back to my corrugated tin housing unit. My leg muscles twitched, completely dead. I stood in the center of the cramped metal box, unfastened the thick Velcro straps, and let my 15-pound Kevlar plate carrier drop to the aluminum floor with a dull, heavy thud. My boots were caked in a thick layer of chalky white dirt. I tasted gunpowder and dried sand in the back of my throat. I reached into the cargo pocket of my uniform pants and pulled out my phone to check the time. The screen lit up. It vibrated in my palm. A single, sharp notification. An automated alert from my bank. The $1,000 hazard pay deposit that the military had wired into my joint account that very morning was gone. Completely wiped out. I stared at the harsh white light of the screen, my tired eyes reading the merchant transaction code. Prada Boutique, 5th Avenue, New York, $1,250. It was a birthday present. Diana had taken my blood money and bought herself a designer handbag. I stood there in a sweltering metal box in a war zone. I was eating dirt. I was dodging mortar shells that randomly dropped from the night sky. And back in America, she was swiping my debit card in a high-end, air-conditioned luxury store, probably complaining to a sales clerk about the humidity. She was going to spray on expensive perfume and carry a leather purse bought with the exact money I earned by keeping American soldiers out of body bags. I did not throw the phone against the wall. I did not dial Mark's number to scream into the receiver. Screaming is useless. Complaining does not fix a compromised supply line. I sat down on the edge of my hard, narrow cot. I reached into my metal footlocker and pulled out a battered, dog-eared paperback book. Jocko Willink. I flipped directly to the chapter on extreme ownership. The words on the page hit me like a physical blow to the jaw. Blaming Diana was a coward's way out. Diana was a parasite. Parasites do exactly what they are designed to do. They feed on a host until there is nothing left. But I was the host. I gave her the access. I left the joint account open. I tolerated Mark's pathetic excuses. I handed them the knife, and now I was angry that they used it to bleed me. I had to take ownership of my own blind stupidity. Right there in the dark, I built a steel wall inside my head. I locked my emotions securely behind it. I stopped looking for a brotherly bond that died the day Diana moved in. I used the ruthless discipline the military taught me to deal with the chaotic mess of my civilian family. I became cold. I became silent. I cut my own personal spending down to bare survival rations. I just watched the ledger biding my time, waiting for the exact right moment to rip this toxic weed out by the roots. The heavy smell of polished oak suddenly pushed the memory of burnt cordite out of my brain. I was back in the dining room in Fairfax. My left hand was still resting quietly under the edge of the $6,000 table. My thumb was still hovering over the glowing glass screen of my phone. I pressed down, cancel recurring payment, confirm. The screen flashed green. The transaction was finalized. The joint account was locked down tight. Diana was officially bankrupt. She just did not know it yet. She was still sitting across the table, her mouth hanging open in a silent, ugly gasp, staring in absolute horror at Brooks. The former Delta Force operator did not share my cold, calculated discipline. He was not a ghost. The warrior inside him had been provoked. The blatant, sneering disrespect she threw at my rank had flipped a violent switch in his brain. Brooks planted both of his massive, scarred hands flat onto the dining table. The thick wood actually groaned under his weight. He leaned his entire upper body forward, closing the physical distance between him and Diana, casting a dark shadow over her expensive china plates. The ticking bomb on the dinner table had just hit 0. Diana actually had the nerve to keep her crooked little smirk plastered on her face for another 2 seconds. She was waiting for Brooks to laugh. She thought her cheap, disrespectful little joke about my military service was going to land. She thought the rugged high-end security consultant she was trying to court for a multi-million-dollar defense contract was going to chuckle, clink his glass with hers, and agree that I was just a useless leech. She did not realize she had just tap-danced onto a live landmine. Brooks did not laugh. He moved. He stood up so fast his heavy wooden chair shot backward. The wooden legs scraped against the hardwood floor, letting out a high-pitched, violent screech that ripped through the quiet dining room. He was no longer the polite, golf-playing corporate executive wearing a crisp Ralph Lauren polo. The man simply vanished. In a fraction of a second, his entire physical stance shifted. His broad shoulders squared off. His center of gravity dropped low and forward. His dark eyes locked onto Diana with dead, absolute focus. It was the stance of a Delta Force operator preparing to neutralize a high-value target. He sucked all the oxygen out of the room. He slammed both of his scarred, massive hands flat down onto the table. The force of it made the solid oak shudder. The dark red Cabernet in Diana's crystal wine glass sloshed violently over the rim, staining the pristine white tablecloth like fresh blood. Apologize to her. Right now. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble. It was not a request. It was not polite dinner conversation. It was a battlefield command dripping with pure menace. Diana froze. The blood drained out of her face so fast she looked like a corpse wearing too much lipstick. What, Brooks, I was just joking, she stammered. Her voice cracked small and pathetic. Brooks leaned closer. His face was inches from hers. The veins in his thick neck bulged. Do you have any earthly idea what Reaper 2 means? He snarled, spitting the words right into her pale face. When grunts like me were pinned down in the mud in the Koringal Valley, taking heavy machine gun fire from the ridges bleeding out in the dirt, she was the one sitting in the intel room. She was the one running the grid. She called in the fire support that kept us breathing. Diana shrank back, pressing herself flat against her chair. Her fake corporate feminist boss lady armor was completely stripped away. She looked like exactly what she was, an arrogant, ignorant civilian playing dress-up in a world she did not understand. A fleck of spit flew from Brooks's mouth as he jabbed a thick, calloused finger directly at her nose. He did not leave her a single shred of dignity. She held the lives of dozens of trigger pullers in her bare hands. The tactical intelligence inside her head crushes your entire garbage corporate board of directors. She brought us home alive, and you dare call her a paper pusher. The silence that followed was deafening. The only sound was the harsh, ragged breathing coming from Brooks's chest. I sat perfectly still. My hands remained flat on my thighs. I did not need to raise my voice. I did not need to defend my honor. The profound, unspoken brotherhood of the United States military was doing it for me. A man who had kicked down doors in Fallujah and bled in the Afghan dirt recognized exactly what I was. He saw my worth, even if my own flesh and blood treated me like dirt on their shoes. I slowly turned my head. I looked at Mark. My older brother had dropped his linen napkin. Both of his hands were gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles were white. He was terrified. He was staring at Brooks with wide, panicked eyes. But he did not say a single word. He did not defend his wife. He did not tell Brooks to step back. And he sure as hell did not look at me. The cowardice was baked right into his marrow. He was paralyzed, a hollow man watching his kingdom burn down around him. Brooks held his aggressive stance for 3 more agonizing seconds, letting the sheer weight of his disgust crush Diana into silence. Then he slowly stood up straight. He rolled his broad shoulders back, exhaling a long, sharp breath through his nose. He had just pulverized Diana's bloated ego. He had humiliated her in her own dining room. But an operator like Brooks does not just wound a target and walk away. He finishes the job. He reached down and casually picked up the expensive cloth napkin he had been using. He wiped his hands with it, his face turning completely blank. Cold. Corporate. He was done yelling. Now he was going to hit her where it actually hurt. He was going to aim a hollow-point bullet straight at her bank account. Brooks held the crumpled linen napkin in his massive right hand. He did not fold it. He did not place it neatly next to his plate like a civilized dinner guest. He tossed it directly into the center of his half-eaten, dry-aged ribeye. A thick, greasy smear of brown gravy stained the expensive white fabric. The casual physical disrespect of the gesture hit harder than a closed fist slap to the face. I do not sign contracts with people who wipe their feet on the uniform, Brooks stated. His voice was bone-dry, hollow, zero room for negotiation or corporate double talk. This deal is dead. Millions of dollars in government defense subcontracts just evaporated into thin air. A multi-year revenue stream vanished, all because Diana could not resist the urge to crack a cheap, arrogant joke at my expense. She lunged forward. Her knee caught the heavy base of the dining table, rattling the crystal wine glasses. Wait, Brooks, you can't just do that. The framework is already drafted. We have lawyers reviewing the NDA. She reached out with both hands, her long manicured nails hooking desperately onto the sleeve of his tailored polo shirt. It was an act of pure, pathetic desperation. She looked like a drowning rat clinging to a piece of driftwood. Brooks did not even look at her. He just flexed his heavy bicep and snapped his arm back, shaking her off with the exact same physical revulsion you would use to brush a venomous scorpion off your combat boot. Diana stumbled backward, her high heels scraping awkwardly against the hardwood floor. Brooks turned his back on her entirely. He walked around the edge of the long table, his heavy leather boots thudding rhythmically against the floorboards, and stopped exactly 3 paces away from where I was sitting. He did not offer a handshake. He did not offer any empty civilian platitudes or sympathetic smiles. He simply squared his broad shoulders, locked his knees, and snapped his chin up. He gave me a sharp, rigid nod. The exact kind of silent, absolute respect traded between operators standing on a hot tarmac in the middle of a war zone. "An honor to meet you, Major," he said, his voice dropping into a low, deeply respectful timbre. I held his gaze. I kept my face entirely blank, masking the surge of validation rushing through my chest. I gave him a single, measured nod in return. Acknowledged. Brooks pivoted sharply on his heel. He did not glance back at Diana. He did not look at Mark. He marched straight down the hallway. The brass doorknob turned with a heavy metallic click. Slam. The heavy front door shut. The sound echoed up the high ceilings and rattled the drywall. The cold night air from the street outside was instantly cut off. The silence that rushed in to fill the vacuum inside the dining room was heavy and suffocating. The carefully curated high-end dinner party was now a complete disaster zone. Diana was standing dead center in the room, frozen stiff. Her chest heaved violently under her silk blouse. Her eyes were blown wide open, staring at the empty hallway. The perfect, lucrative script she had written for her life had just been put through an industrial shredder. I sat back in my chair and watched her process the reality of the situation. A narcissist backed into a corner will never ever look inward. They are incapable of it. They will never accept fault for running their own mouth. They will immediately look for a soft target to absorb their rage. She did not look at me. She knew exactly what I was. I was a brick wall, and she had just watched Brooks bounce right off me with nothing but respect. So she spun around, her face twisting into something ugly and feral, and locked onto the weakest animal in the room. She lunged at Mark. She grabbed him by the collar of his light blue dress shirt, her knuckles digging right into his throat. Mark let out a pathetic, startled gasp, throwing both of his hands up defensively in front of his chest like a frightened child. "This is all because of your goddamn bitch of a sister," Diana shrieked. The sound was unbearable, high-pitched, raw, and completely unhinged. It clawed at my eardrums. It was the sound of a spoiled brat who had just been told no for the first time in her adult life. She just nuked my entire career. My biggest contract of the year is gone. Diana was shaking him violently, her face contorted into a mask of pure, ugly rage. Saliva flew from her lips. "What the hell are you just standing there for? Throw her out, pack her trash bags, and throw her out on the street right now." Mark stumbled backward, his heels slipping on the polished wood. He did not push her off. He did not tell her to lower her voice or respect the house. He just stood there, a 42-year-old man cowering in his own dining room while his wife treated him like a stray dog. "Diana, please, honey, calm down. Let's just talk about this. We can call him tomorrow." Mark stammered, his voice trembling. He was practically begging. He was apologizing for my existence, apologizing for the fact that a guest had defended me, apologizing for breathing her air. It was sickening. It was a complete structural collapse of whatever spine he had left from his blue-collar days. I was looking at a man who used to break his back pulling night shifts, now completely castrated by a woman who valued a corporate contract over his own flesh and blood. I could not sit there and watch it anymore. I took a slow, deep breath through my nose. I placed both of my palms flat against the smooth edge of the $6,000 oak table. I pushed my chair back, the wooden legs sliding silently across the floor, and I stood up. It was time to establish martial law. Diana shrieked a few more unintelligible curses at the ceiling, stomped her expensive heels against the hardwood, and stormed up the heavy wooden staircase. A second later, the master bedroom door slammed shut so hard it rattled the framed pictures hanging on the hallway drywall. I did not follow her. I did not care. I walked slowly toward the back of the house. The kitchen was half lit, smelling heavily of congealing beef fat and burnt garlic from the dinner party. Mark was standing at the oversized stainless steel sink. He had his back to me. Both of his hands were braced against the metal edge. The faucet was running on full blast. Freezing cold water pounded down over a stack of greasy, half-scraped porcelain plates, splashing over the rim and soaking the front of his light blue dress shirt. He was not washing them. He was just staring down the drain. His broad shoulders were shaking, short, jagged tremors. He was crying. Not the loud, angry tears of a man who had just lost a fight. These were the choked, suffocating sobs of a man completely stripped of his dignity. A 42-year-old former blue-collar worker who had just been verbally castrated in his own home, right in front of the little sister he used to protect. I stopped a few feet behind him. The rubber soles of my tactical boots made zero sound on the tile. I did not reach out. I did not place a comforting hand on his shoulder. I did not tell him it was going to be okay. That is what civilians do when they want to avoid ugly truths. "Wash it off, Mark," I said. My voice was dead flat, low, unforgiving. Mark flinched like I had hit him with a live wire. He scrambled to turn around, swiping the back of his wet hand aggressively across his eyes. His face was blotchy. His eyes were bloodshot and swimming with humiliated tears. "Alicia? God, Al, I am so sorry." He choked out, his voice cracking violently. He gripped the edge of the granite counter behind him. "I should have stopped her. I should have stood up for you out there. I stepped forward. I reached past him, grabbed the heavy chrome handle of the faucet, and yanked it down. The water cut off instantly. The sudden silence in the kitchen was heavier than the noise. "You did not just fail to protect me," I said, looking dead into his red, wet eyes. "You are failing to protect yourself." He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. In my unit, I continued, keeping my tone leveled like I was delivering a cold post-action debriefing. If an infantryman drops his rifle in a firefight and refuses to defend his own life, the squad leader has to make a call. We leave him behind. We do not drag dead weight through a kill zone and get the rest of the platoon slaughtered. Mark shrank back against the counter. The kitchen fluorescent light cast deep, hollow shadows under his cheekbones. "I cannot save a man who refuses to save himself, Mark," I said. He let out a ragged, pathetic breath. Both of his soaking wet hands gripped the fabric of his shirt. "You do not understand, Al. I do not know what else to do." He pleaded, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. She told me if I do not bring in your money, if I cannot provide that lifestyle, I am just a useless piece of garbage, just a washed-up plumber. I stepped half a pace closer. I aimed directly at the infected wound in his head and drove the knife in. "You handed her the knife, Mark. You gave her that power over you." I reached into the pocket of my tactical cargo pants. I pulled out my phone. The screen was dark, but the weight of it in my hand was absolute. I held it up right in front of his face. 15 minutes ago, I logged into the joint account. I canceled every single recurring transfer. The hazard pay, the housing allowance, all of it. Mark stopped breathing. His eyes locked onto the black rectangle of my phone. "My supply line to this house is permanently severed. The financial bailout ends tonight." Panic, raw, unfiltered civilian panic exploded across his face. "Alicia, wait. You cannot do that." He stammered, his hands coming off the counter, reaching toward me like a beggar. "The mortgage. The bank is going to foreclose. Diana will absolutely destroy me." I cut him off. Not as his little sister, as a field-grade military officer. "Take some damn ownership, Mark." My voice cracked like a rifle shot in the tight kitchen. He physically recoiled. "It is your life. You have the right to own it. You can either stand up on your own 2 feet, fight back, and reclaim your dignity as a man." I pointed a stiff finger straight at the kitchen floor. "Or you can stay on your knees right there and drown in this toxic swamp with her." I did not wait for his answer. A commanding officer does not beg a subordinate to follow orders. You give the directive, and you walk away. I spun on my heel. I marched straight out of the kitchen, heading toward the hallway stairs. I am leaving this house at exactly 0600 tomorrow morning. I threw the words over my shoulder, cold and final. Make your choice. If you have ever had to practice tough love and cut off a family member to force them to wake up, you know exactly how heavy this feels. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop tough love in the comments right now to show you stand with me. I left him standing there in the dark, smelling like old grease and regret staring at the dry stainless steel sink. The countdown had officially started. 5:45 a.m. The heavy brass zipper of my tactical rucksack ripped through the quiet morning air with a harsh metallic screech. I did not own much. A few faded camouflage uniforms, heavy combat boots, and civilian basics. Every single item was tightly rolled and jammed into the nylon compartments with brutal efficiency, following standard military inspection protocols. I hauled the 40-pound pack over my right shoulder. It felt light. I took one last look around the spare bedroom Mark and Diana let me use. It was a cold, empty box. There were no framed pictures of my childhood on the walls. No personal trinkets on the expensive mahogany dresser. Just a sterile guest room mattress with high thread count sheets. It did not look like a home. It looked like a temporary holding cell. I grabbed the thick canvas strap of the rucksack, turned my back on the room, and stepped out into the hallway. The slate gray light of the Virginia dawn was just starting to bleed through the oversized suburban windows. The house was dead quiet. My thick rubber soles made absolutely zero sound against the carpet as I descended the staircase. She was waiting for me at the bottom. Diana had not slept a single wink. Her expensive mascara was smeared in dark, ugly streaks under her swollen eyes, making her look like a cornered raccoon. But she still had her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her chin was tipped up. Even after watching her entire fake empire burn to the ground last night, she still thought she could project superiority. She still thought I was the obedient cash cow who would wake up, apologize, and open my wallet. "We need to talk," she demanded, her voice hoarse from screaming but dripping with that familiar entitlement. I stopped on the third step from the bottom. I did not drop my bag. I just stared down at her. "You completely humiliated me last night," she hissed, uncrossing her arms and stepping closer, jabbing her manicured finger toward my chest. "You ruined my reputation with Brooks. You tanked the biggest security contract of my fiscal year. So tell me, Alicia, how exactly are you planning to compensate me for this?" She was completely delusional. Her brain could not physically process the concept of taking responsibility. Every single failure was my fault, and I had to pay cash to fix it. I stepped down the final 3 stairs. I did not stop when I hit the hardwood floor. I kept moving forward. I stepped directly into her personal space. The sheer, overwhelming physical pressure of a trained military officer bearing down on her forced Diana to instinctively take a jerky step backward. Her heel caught on the edge of a decorative rug. "Family does not bleed each other dry and then curse the well," I said. My voice was barely above a whisper. It did not echo, but it cut through the cold morning air like a straight razor. "That financial pipeline you have been gorging yourself on. It was severed last night. The joint accounts are locked. My direct deposits are rerouted." Diana's mouth fell open. The arrogant scowl melted right off her face, replaced by a sudden, sickening realization. "And your little corporate charade is over." I continued, my eyes locked dead onto hers. "You are done using my military rank to pad your garbage security firm's resume. You are done dropping my call sign at fancy dinner parties to impress men who actually served. From this second forward, you fund your own life." The muscles in her jaw twitched violently. She could not believe what she was hearing. "Are you threatening me in my own damn house?" she shrieked, her voice skyrocketing into a panicked, defensive pitch. I leaned in. My face was inches from hers. I could smell the stale wine and sheer desperation radiating off her skin. "If you ever speak my name in public again," I whispered, every word a hollow point bullet. "If I hear that you have laid a single finger on Mark, or if you ever try to gaslight him about his worth again, I swear to God on the rank pinned to my collar, I will drag you through the mud." She stopped breathing. "I will subpoena every single bank statement," I promised her. "I will lay out a decade of forensic audits in a civil courtroom. I will show the whole world exactly how you funded this little McMansion fantasy with the hazard pay of a deployed soldier. I will strip you down to nothing." She stumbled backward. Her back hit the heavy wooden banister. She was gasping for air, her chest heaving like a drowning victim. I had just taken a sledgehammer to the very foundation of her narcissistic reality. The money was gone. The reputation was gone. The control was gone. She looked around wildly, eyes wide with pure, unfiltered terror. She reached for the only weapon she had left. "Mark!" she screamed, twisting her head toward the dark kitchen hallway. Her voice was shrill, completely hysterical. "Mark, get out here. Are you just going to stand there and let your sister threaten your wife in your own house?" "Mark." Her shriek echoed through the high ceilings, fading into a dead, heavy silence. I did not move. Diana gripped the banister, her knuckles white, panting heavily. We both stared down the dark hallway leading to the kitchen. Nothing. The silence dragged out for 3 agonizing seconds. Then 4. Then the floorboards groaned. Someone was walking out of the dark. Diana actually smirked. She stood there by the banister, panting, but a smug, ugly little curve twisted the corner of her mouth. She was waiting. She had screamed for her husband, and she fully expected the beaten dog to come running out of the dark kitchen, tail tucked between his legs, ready to soothe her ego and throw his sister to the wolves. But the silence dragged on. Then the floorboards groaned. It was a footstep, but it did not sound right. It was not the hurried, shuffling, apologetic scurry Mark had adopted over the last 10 years. This sound was different, slow, heavy, deliberate. Mark stepped out of the shadows of the kitchen hallway and into the pale morning light of the foyer. He was not wearing the grease-stained apron anymore. He was wearing an old, faded flannel shirt over a plain white undershirt. His broad shoulders, the ones he had ruined crawling under rusted sinks in Chicago, were no longer hunched forward. His spine was locked straight. But the biggest change was his eyes. For the first time in a decade, Mark did not look at Diana with a desperate, pathetic hunger for her approval. He did not flinch. He did not look at the floor. He stared dead center into her face, and his eyes were completely hollow. It was the cold, calculating stare of a man waking up from a 10-year coma. "Alicia is right," Mark said. His voice was not loud. It did not boom off the drywall like Brooks's roar the night before. It was just an incredibly steady, grounded rumble. The sound of a blue-collar worker who had finally had enough. Diana's mouth fell open. The smug smirk vanished instantly, replaced by sheer shock. "What did you just say?" she shrieked, her voice cracking. Mark reached into the breast pocket of his flannel shirt. He pulled out his right hand, the one missing the top knuckle of the index finger. Between his thumb and middle finger, he held up a small black plastic flash drive. "I did not sleep last night." Mark said, his voice flat. "I sat in the dark and backed up the hard drive on the home security system. I pulled every single piece of indoor camera footage from the last 6 months. I exported every abusive text message, every threat, every time you screamed at me like I was a stray dog." Diana froze. The blood completely drained from her face. "I called a lawyer at 5 a.m. Mark continued, his tone methodical, executing a kill shot. "The divorce papers will be sitting on your desk first thing Monday morning, and they are going to include a demand for a full third-party forensic audit of every single bank account tied to this house." Diana's knees actually buckled. She let out a pathetic, suffocated gasp and grabbed the heavy wooden banister just to keep herself from collapsing onto the floor. The entire empire she had built, funded by my combat deployments and maintained by Mark's absolute terror, was crashing down on her head in real time. She had no money left. I had cut the supply line. She had no victim left. Mark was standing his ground. She was suddenly reduced to a complete zero. Stripped naked of all her corporate armor, standing in a hallway with smeared makeup, realizing that she was going to have to explain her fraud in a civil courtroom. You would not dare," Diana whimpered. It was not a threat anymore. It was a plea. "You cannot afford a lawyer, Mark. You have nothing." Mark stared at her, his face turning to stone. "I would rather go back to busting my knuckles on rusted pipes for minimum wage." Mark said, his voice dropping into a lethal growl, "Then spend one more day being a dog on your leash." He lowered his hand, dropping the flash drive back into his pocket. He turned his back on her entirely. I looked at my brother. I did not say a word. I did not need to. A military commander does not need to coddle a soldier who volunteers to step back onto the firing line. I just gave him a single hard nod. Acknowledged. He gave me a stiff nod back. The mission was complete. I grabbed the heavy canvas strap of my 40-pound rucksack, hoisted it higher on my shoulder, and turned toward the front door. I grabbed the cold brass handle and shoved the heavy oak door open. The freezing, bone-chilling air of a Virginia winter morning hit me right in the chest. For the first time in years, it did not feel like a threat. It felt clean. It felt like oxygen. I stepped out onto the concrete porch. I did not look back at the oversized McMansion. I did not look back at Diana whimpering by the stairs. I pulled the heavy door shut behind me. Click. The lock engaged. The rearguard action was over. The civilian toxicity was sealed inside that plaster box forever. I walked down the driveway, the thick rubber treads of my boots crunching rhythmically against the thin layer of morning frost. My black Ford F-150 was parked at the curb, its heavy V8 engine block cold. I tossed my rucksack into the flatbed with a loud metallic clang and climbed into the driver's seat. I jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, a deep, aggressive growl that shook the steering column. Before I could even shift the truck into drive, the dashboard console lit up. The blue Bluetooth indicator flashed rapidly. Incoming call. Brooks Hale. I rested my hand on the gear shift and stared at the glowing screen. My hand rested on the thick, freezing cold leather of the steering wheel. I stared at the glowing blue text on the dashboard console. Incoming call, Brooks Hale. I pressed the heavy rubber button on the steering wheel with my thumb to accept the call. Then I shifted into drive and stomped my heavy combat boot down on the gas pedal. The 5.0-liter V8 engine of my black Ford F-150 roared to life. It was a deep, guttural mechanical growl that vibrated straight up through the floorboards and into the base of my spine. I cranked the steering wheel hard to the left, pulling away from the frozen curb. The heavy all-terrain tires crunched aggressively over the thin layer of morning frost covering the asphalt. I reached out and cranked the cabin heater to maximum. I kept my eyes fixed straight ahead. I did not glance at the rearview mirror. I did not care to watch that sprawling, overpriced Fairfax McMansion shrink into the distance. I let the thick wall of gray morning fog swallow it whole. Good riddance. The suffocating, toxic air of that house was permanently behind me. The cab of my truck was freezing, but it smelled like black coffee, old leather, and gun oil. It smelled like absolute freedom. Major! A voice rumbled through the truck's surround sound speakers. Brooke sounded exactly like he did the night before. Gravelly, strictly professional. But there was a hard, unmistakable edge of cold satisfaction hiding right underneath the surface of his tone. "Just call me Alicia," I replied, keeping my eyes locked on the empty suburban road ahead, navigating the tight turns of the wealthy neighborhood. "Negative, ma'am. You earned the rank." Brooks shot back without missing a single beat. He cleared his throat. "I am making this call as a professional courtesy. I wanted you to hear it directly from me before the corporate lawyers start sending out the official emails. I just hit send on my final risk assessment report for the board of directors regarding your sister-in-law's security firm." He did not beat around the bush. Special operators never do. They strip away the fat and give you the bottom line up front. "I officially killed the partnership." Brooks stated, his voice ringing with absolute finality over the static of the Bluetooth connection. I pulled the plug. Reason for rejection. Hostile corporate leadership, a deeply toxic organizational mindset, and a severe fundamental lack of understanding regarding national security protocols. It was a kill shot straight to the jugular. In the cutthroat world of government defense contracting, your reputation is the only currency that actually matters. You can have all the slick PowerPoint presentations and imported designer suits in the world, but if the operators do not trust you, you are dead. Brooks was not just some corporate suit pushing papers around a mahogany desk. He was a former Tier 1 operator. He was a top-level intelligence consultant. His word carried the weight of a sledgehammer in those high-rise boardrooms in Washington, D.C. By putting those exact words, hostile, toxic, incompetent, into an official corporate risk assessment, he did not just cost Diana a single multi-million-dollar deal. He effectively blacklisted her entire firm. Her name would be flagged in the vendor databases. The report would circulate through the tight-knit veteran network that runs private security in this country. Guys talk. Word travels fast in this industry. She would never secure a federal government contract again. No Pentagon money. No Department of Homeland Security bids. Nothing. Her little fake corporate empire was dead in the water, bleeding out from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the mouth. She tried to step on a soldier to make herself look taller, and it ended up snapping her own neck. A slow, hard smirk pulled at the corner of my mouth. It was the first time I had genuinely smiled in days. The sheer ruthless efficiency of it all was beautiful. "Thank you, Sergeant," I said. 2 words. I did not need to pour my heart out. I did not need to give a tearful emotional speech about how much this meant to me. We were 2 soldiers. We spoke in actions, not empty civilian gratitude. He saw a threat to a fellow service member, and he neutralized it. "No one gets left behind," Brooks replied. The old military mantra. To civilians, it sounds like a cheesy line from a Hollywood war movie, but to us, it was a blood oath. He proved right there that the brotherhood of the uniform does not magically disappear just because you take off the combat boots and put on a civilian suit. You protect your own. You cover your squad's 6, always. "Drive safe, Major," he said. "Copy that. Out," I replied. The line clicked dead. The Bluetooth disconnected, plunging the cab back into the steady rhythmic hum of the V8 engine and the blast of the hot air from the vents. I gripped the thick leather steering wheel tighter. I pushed the gas pedal down, feeling the heavy truck surge forward as I hit the entrance ramp for the I-95 interstate. The tires hit the highway pavement, picking up speed, leaving the toxic wreckage of Fairfax miles behind me. The sky to the east was just starting to crack open, bleeding a pale, icy blue over the Virginia tree line. Then the dashboard console lit up again. Another incoming call. I glanced down at the glowing screen. My grip on the leather wheel instantly tightened. My spine locked perfectly straight against the driver's seat, my military posture kicking in purely on instinct. Caller ID Colonel Sterling. Base Commander. I took a sharp breath in. This was not a courtesy call. Base commanders do not call field-grade officers at 6 in the morning just to chat about the weather. This was official business. This was the final verdict on my career. I reached out my thumb and pressed the answer button. I pressed my right thumb firmly against the thick rubber button on the steering wheel. "Hudson." Colonel Sterling's voice barked through the surround sound speakers of the truck cab. It was loud, authoritative, the exact kind of voice that routinely cut through heavy radio static in a combat zone and demanded absolute, unquestioning compliance. It instantly grounded me. I kept my eyes fixed on the long stretch of gray asphalt unfolding ahead of the hood. I actively pushed the suffocating memory of that Fairfax McMansion out of my skull. I pushed the shrill, pathetic sound of Diana's shrieking right out of my eardrums. I was transitioning back to the real world. "Ready for duty, sir," I answered. My voice was locked down. Solid rock, no hesitation. "Good," Sterling replied. The sharp, rigid clip of his words softened by just a fraction of an inch. "Because the Pentagon officially stamped the paperwork this morning. Congratulations, Hudson. Your promotion to 05 cleared the board." I gripped the leather steering wheel tighter. The cold leather creaked under the pressure of my bare fingers. "Get your gears squared away, Lieutenant Colonel Uris," he continued, not leaving a single second of dead air for empty civilian celebration. "I am handing you operational command of the new Tactical Intelligence Detachment. We spin up in 48 hours. I expect you sharp." "Copy that, sir. I will be on base by 0900. I tapped the button. The line went dead. The speakers returned to the low, steady hum of the highway. Lieutenant Colonel Alicia Hudson. I let the title sit there in the freezing cab of the truck. It felt incredibly heavy, but it felt earned. The validation did not come from sitting at an overpriced oak dining room table. It did not come from draining a bank account to buy fake respect from a toxic, narcissistic sister-in-law. It came from the dirt, from the mud, from the blood I spilled, keeping my people alive in the worst corners of the globe. I was not a paper pusher. I was not a human ATM, wrapped in a camouflage uniform. I was a combat-tested commander. The steel wall I had built inside my chest over the years was finally fully fortified. A tight, hard knot of emotion rose in the back of my throat, thick and heavy, but I swallowed it down hard. My face remained a mask of cold, tactical focus in the rearview mirror. I survived the incoming mortar fire in Kandahar, and I survived my own flesh and blood. The ledger was clear. The blood debt was officially zeroed out. A soft, quick chime broke the deep rumble of the V8 engine. My phone screen lit up on the center console, illuminating the plastic cup holders. A single text message. The sender ID red mark. I did not pick the phone up. I did not take my hands off the wheel. I just glanced down at the glowing white letters while keeping the heavy truck perfectly centered in the fast lane. I packed my bags. I am backing my truck out of the driveway right now. I am taking my life back. Thank you, my commander. I stared at those words for a long time. The tight defensive lock on my jaw finally broke. The corner of my mouth pulled up. It was a real smile. Not the plastic forced garbage people use at suburban dinner parties to hide their misery. A genuine, hard-won smile. My older brother was finally out of the swamp. He actually did it. He stopped playing the hostage. He packed his own gear and walked out of the prison cell. The fact that he called me his commander told me everything I needed to know. He respected the boundary. He respected the rank. He finally saw me as the adult I was, not the helpless 12-year-old kid he had to protect from broken glass. The last line of defense was reestablished. Diana was currently standing all alone in a massive, expensive house she could not afford, armed with a fake corporate image that was currently bleeding to death on the floor. The narcissist was completely disarmed. She was locked inside a cage built entirely out of her own massive, fragile ego. The bank would come for the house. The lawyers would come for the accounts. She would have to face the music with absolutely zero cover fire. I pressed my heavy combat boot down harder on the gas pedal. The F-150 surged forward, the RPM needle climbing as I hit the open stretch of the I-95 interstate. The sky over the Virginia tree line cracked wide open. The slate-gray morning fog finally burned off. The sun breached the horizon, a blinding, brilliant gold that flooded straight through the windshield. It washed over the concrete barriers and lit up the dashboard. The heater blasted hot air against my numb knuckles, thawing out the last of the winter chill. Everything in my rearview mirror was dead and buried. I used strict military discipline to carve the rot out of my civilian life. I fought back with ruthless, absolute silence, and I took my honor back by force. The road ahead was wide open. The heavy tires gripped the asphalt, eating up the miles at 80 miles an hour. New coordinates were waiting for me. Lieutenant Colonel Alicia Hudson was heading back to the firing line, unbroken, untouchable, unconquerable. Thank you so much for listening today. Please hit that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe to support the channel. Stay strong out there, and I will see you next time.